Good morning, everybody. Keith Engel with TGI Sports Talk, live from East Greenbush, New York. I think it's going to be another nice day today here in the Northeast. A little summer weather. Can't really call it Indian summer. We haven't had a frost yet. So I welcome you all here today. I want to continue to thank you all for watching the show, following the page. Continue to get your friends to like and follow the TGI Sports Talk page right here on the NLB network. Who knows? Maybe more news to come about NLB here in the near term. I want to thank my guest from last week, Harvey Araton. Harvey has got several books out, as we talked about. Please visit Amazon, buy his book, his new book about his relationship with a 40-year friendship with a Knicks fan as he was covering the team. A woman who sat right behind the bench is just an awesome read. So I would appreciate it if everybody got out, bought that book from Harry, because it's going to be a great read. And it'll be out shortly. And he's got some other great books out as well, as we talked about last week. So I want to thank Harry. We've got some great guests coming up. I've got Billy Martin Jr. next week, who will talk about his dad's legacy. Billy's, kind of on a crusade to get his dad in the Hall of Fame. Billy had his flaws, but Billy was a great Major League Baseball manager, and I think we'll have a great conversation there. And in a couple of weeks, we've got Fred Mitchell, who's covered the Chicago Bears for a long time, wrote the book on the great Gale Sayers. And if you don't know Gale Sayers, if you're one of my younger audience members, please take a look at who Gale Sayers is. I'm sorry. Gale passed away here just in the last few weeks. So not to be callous, he's to be missed. We've lost a lot of great sports legends here this last month. It's been a very sad time for people of my age, sports fans of my age. So my guest today, we had to record the interview last night, and I've had a few technical difficulties this morning, so I hope this comes off without a hitch. It's only the second time I've recorded an interview previous to the show. But my guest is Ian O'Connor. Ian is a award-winning sports writer. Right now he's a contributor for ESPN.com. He writes some wonderful articles there. I followed Ian for quite a few years in the different media markets. He also wrote for the New York Daily News, USA Today, and he has a book, several books out. He's got a book called Arnie and Jack about the Arnie Palmer and Jack Nicklaus relationship, friendship. Sometimes they were enemies. I've just downloaded that book, actually. I'm going to be reading it this weekend. The Captain, which is the journey of Derek Jeter. And a book we'll be talking about a bit today called Belichick, the making of the greatest coach of all time. After the interview, I'll be back to wrap it up. You guys can certainly ask your questions as you normally would in the room. And I want to say good morning to Dave Guyette, who I can see here. And Billy Martin does deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, Dave. I agree. So tune in next week. We'll have a great interview with Billy Martin Jr. As I started to say, I'll be back after the interview. Hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties here. Please ask your questions. I don't know that I can monitor them, and I'm going to try to remember to mute my mic. The last time I did this, I did. I know we had some strange sounds coming through the first 10 minutes of the interview. But the interview's, 50 minutes or so, and I'll be back afterwards to wrap it up. I want to thank you guys, and I also want to remind you to tune into the Mac and Jack show on Max Sports on Facebook. They also broadcast live on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, every place you can kind of think of. But I'm a guest there and have been for the last several weeks on the show at 9:15. Talk a little bit about the New England Patriots. So I would invite you to join me there and watch their show. They're on Monday through Sunday, I think, 8 to 10. So they've got a little bit more time to put to this. I know they're busy guys too, but join me on Fridays, 9:15. I have a great, 25-minute segment with them, and it's very enjoyable. So without further ado, I want to bring in Bill Belichick. Boy, if I was bringing in Bill Belichick, it would be a very quiet hour, wouldn't it? So anyway, let's see if we can share this interview with Ian O'Connor, again, ESPN.com writer. And you'll hear some interesting stuff here. And please post your comments, post your questions. I'll certainly get to them as I can. I promise you that. And I'll see you after this interview. Fingers crossed. Well, now we're live with Ian O'Connor, ESPN writer, former writer with the New York Daily News, USA Today. Ian just today was named David Anderson. Correct me if I'm wrong in this. In the 2020 David. Writing award, a winner. So
congratulations. Thanks, Keith. Yeah, with the Pro Football Writer America. Anything associated with Dave Anderson, very good by me. So I was humbled by it.
Yeah, he's a well-known name. It's funny because I was looking at your bio on Wikipedia, and I thought there was an interesting line there. It was giving all your some of your accolades and your past jobs, and it said, "Have you seen your Wikipedia page lately, by the way?"
I'm sure somebody's altered it to some degree.
Ian looks and is very unathletic. At the
I'm going to have to go in there and change that. That is a fallacy. But
you certainly look very athletic. I don't know about how athletic you are, as who you are.
No, that probably was a relative of mine who inserted that line, but that will be fixed.
The problem with, I'm glad I could point out to you, that's the problem with Wikipedia is you can kind of just make it up as you go along.
Yeah. Actually, my coaches in high school might agree with that assessment. But one of my coaches was actually the father of Greg Olson, the tight end for the longtime tight end in the NFL. Obviously, spent most of his career with the Panthers. And when I was a freshman and a sophomore at St. Cecilia High School in Englewood, New Jersey, where Vince Lombardi coached, he was my head coach. And when I was that, I was terrible when I was that young. So I'll never forget the amount of times he grabbed me by the face mask and pulled me in. Of course, back then, you could, as a head coach in high school, you could do basically whatever you wanted. And he was an intimidating, big presence in my life during those 2 years. And he's about, you see how big Greg Olson is. He was about the same size. And to me, as a 5'8", 140-pound high school freshman, he looked like he was King Kong. So that was quite an experience. But yeah, so maybe one of my high school coaches actually inserted that line into my entry.
Well, now you got the ability to go back and change it. So, not to get ahead of ourselves here, but it's got to be interesting to have gone to the same high school as Vince Lombardi.
Well, he didn't go there. He coached there. I'm sorry.
Oh, he coached there. I'm sorry. He coached there.
He coached football and basketball.
Yeah, sorry. I did mean that. He coached there, and it's got to be a bit tough for you sometimes to. I think you're on record as saying Bill Belichick is the greatest coach of all time.
I am. Yeah. Well, it wasn't an easy decision to come to on that call because I love everything about Lombardi. He actually lived about 6 to 8 houses away from where I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, when he was coaching at St. Cecilia's back in the early 1940s, late 1930s. And so obviously he won the 5 championships with Bart Starr and the Green Bay Packers, an iconic man in iconic times. But I think Belichick did it at a time when the entire sport was designed to prevent you from having a dynasty. And back in the day, if Vince Lombardi told you what you were going to make in terms of your salary and whether or not he was going to get rid of you, you had no say in the matter. Now, of course, with free agency in sports, it's a whole different culture and ballgame. But right now in the NFL, when you look at the cap, free agency, the schedule, it's all designed to prevent you from having a dynasty. And yet Belichick has found a way to deliver the greatest dynasty in the history of pro football. So with 6 rings, listen, if Lombardi lived longer, the tragedy of the end of his life is factored into this conversation, unfortunately. Had he lived longer, maybe we're having a different conversation. But I would go Belichick 1, Lombardi 2.
Well, I'm a bit biased as a Patriot fan, but I'd have to agree. I mean, is it possible that this type of run can ever happen again?
I don't think in the NFL, in our lifetime anyway, hopefully that's many years still to come, but I just can't see it. Is it possible that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes could win 3? Yeah, I see that, but somebody coming along with a franchise quarterback like Tom Brady and finding a way to win 6, I think it's impossible. I think we'll probably never see that again. And it is more difficult in the NFL where everything is shared and they really do try to knock you down when you're on top, and through the draft, when you're at the bottom, try to give you Trevor Lawrence to get back to the middle and then to the top, and then they'll knock you down again with the schedule and the cap. And when you win a championship, everyone wants to get paid, and you can't keep everybody, you can't pay everybody. So I do not think it will ever happen again. And think of the good fortune that visited the Patriots for it to happen. Belichick was 5-13 in his first 18 games. Nobody, including myself, advised Robert Kraft to hire him in the first place. I wrote an infamous column in 2000 saying it was a lousy hire. I've heard about that for the better part of 2 decades. And yet he made the hire. And Tom Brady was the 199th player taken in the draft. And Bobby Greer was an executive with the Patriots at the time. He called the Michigan football coach, Lloyd Carr. He had a relationship with him. He was the only NFL executive to call Lloyd Carr before the draft to ask about Tom Brady. And Belichick had a quarterbacks coach, Dick Rabine, who scouted Brady and Tim Rattay going into that draft. Belichick assigned him those 2 quarterbacks that I may want to. We had Drew Bledsoe, about to sign that $100 million deal that Kraft gave him, franchise player, franchise quarterback. But we may want to draft somebody in the later rounds as a backup, as insurance. And he wanted to look at those 2 players, Brady and Rattay. And Dick Rabine went out and did that and came back. He didn't dislike the other prospect, but he came back raving about Tom Brady. And he wanted the Patriots, even as early as round 3 or 4, to take him. Well, they waited, of course, until round 6. And so here's a quarterback nobody wanted. The head coach, after his failures in Cleveland, that people in the league office were telling Robert Kraft not to hire. He goes 5-11 in year 1, starts year 2, 0-2, fans calling for his head. Kraft has a new building going up next door from Foxborough Stadium, worried that he's not going to be able to sell season tickets and fill the new. And I was at that game. I was on the sideline when Bledsoe got hurt. The Mo Lewis hit, he's still the loudest hit I've ever heard on any football field on any level, knocking Bledsoe out. And Brady trots in, and the rest is history. Bledsoe never got his job back.
You know, it's funny. I've always maintained that Drew Bledsoe was the MVP of that team because he wasn't happy about not getting his job back when he got healthy. But he didn't make, like a lot of players would have, made a big stink about it. And he was actually ready to play when they needed him in the playoff game against Pittsburgh too. So
Mo Lewis might have been the MVP of the league.
Well, that's a good point.
The dynasty, but remember that Bledsoe. You have to give Bledsoe and Belichick credit for this. In the AFC Championship game in Pittsburgh, so you're on the road against a good team. Brady got hurt. It was an ankle, if I remember correctly, and Bledsoe had to go in there and finish off that game. Not just he went in, if I remember right, it was the end of the first half, early second half. So he played quite a bit of that game. And he wasn't great. Threw 1 touchdown pass, missed a couple of throws, and he almost had a pass intercepted that could have been fatal. But at the end of the day, he did enough to get them to the Super Bowl so he could hand it back to Brady. My understanding is, I know at the time, it was portrayed by the Patriots and others as this really difficult decision to go either Bledsoe or Brady coming off the injury. My understanding of the reporting I did for my Belichick book, there was no question. As long as Brady could walk, he was going to start that game. But they wanted to be respectful to Bledsoe going into that Super Bowl.
Sure, and I think that was the right call to make, too. So you talked about the book, and that's obviously where I want to start. I mean, what was the driving force behind you wanting to write this book in the first place?
Well, it starts with, I guess, that column that I wrote back in 2000. And from there, it was I thought there was a lot of intrigue and mystery around Belichick and a lot that people didn't know about him. He seemed publicly to be a one-dimensional character, and I figured that was not the case, ultimately away from the stadium. I wanted to find out what made him tick as a human being, as a man. And so I ended up interviewing 360 people, not including Bill Belichick, who did not cooperate. He also actively lobbied some people not to ask them not to talk to me. And that's okay. He certainly didn't owe me anything, and that was his prerogative to do that. But I was still able to talk to many, many people, some that he has no idea about, that they did talk to me, maybe not for attribution, but for background. And so I wanted to explain how this happened. How did this person become the greatest pro football coach of all time? And hopefully I pulled that off.
I think you did. It's really a great read. If anybody hasn't read it, please look for it. It's on Amazon, and I'm sure many other outlets. I got it on Kindle myself. So he didn't participate in this book at all, correct?
He did the opposite of participating in the book. He tried to make sure the book didn't happen. But actually, after the Super Bowl victory over the Rams, I was walking out of the Patriots locker room, Keith, and there was John Bon Jovi sort of standing right in front of me. We looked at each other, and I introduced myself, and he said, "I know who you are. I've read your book." And he said, because he's been friends with Belichick for, 35, 40 years,
right.
and good friends. It's not a fake celebrity athlete or coach relationship. They are legitimately good friends. Belichick has gone overseas, even touring with them. And so he said, has Bill ever said anything to you about this book? And I said, John, you've known him for 35 years. Do you really think Bill's going to come up to me and say something about this book that he wanted no part of? So he goes, well, listen, I thought it was, when he told me, I thought it was great. I thought it was, the biggest thing is I thought you were fair to Bill. And I know other friends of Bill who feel the same way. And that's why I wondered if he had said anything to you. And I said, no, that's fine. And I appreciate you saying that. And so I did want to be fair. I wanted to be accurate and really put together the defining portrait of Belichick. I don't think anyone had done that to that point. And my goal was to do that and have it stand basically forever as the defining document on his life and career in the NFL.
Why do you think he didn't want to participate? Is it just because who Bill is in that arena? Or, I mean, it's nothing against Connor, I'm assuming, but.
Well, part of it might have been that column.
Well, that's true.
I'm not sure that my suspicion is that wouldn't be the case entirely. I think that he's a control freak, like most head coaches in professional sports, and he probably thought, well, if I don't have any editorial control over this, I'm not getting any financial reward out of it. Do I really want to lend credibility to a project? I don't know how this is going to turn out. So I have no problem with that. He certainly didn't owe me a damn thing. I would have preferred that he not ask others not to talk to me, but again, that's his prerogative. And it's my job as an author to pitch around that. And at the beginning, this is probably true of any book, and I'm working on my 5th right now, so it's not like I'm John Feinstein and I've written 50 books, but you feel like at the start of the process that you're standing at the base of Mount Everest looking straight up. And it's the most rewarding thing I've found in my profession to get to the top of that mountain. And it's a struggle. The hardest thing I've ever tried to do was that Belichick book. That's by far the hardest thing or challenge I've ever taken on and embraced as a sports journalist. And I may say the same thing 20 years from now.
Yeah. How long did it take to actually write the book and get it out?
Start to finish, A to Z, Keith, it took 3 years. usually I prefer to take 2 years. I'm more of an immediate gratification guy, but I knew that book was different, and I figured it was going to be the toughest challenge that I ever took on, and it was. Every day that I dove into it was a big challenge, and so I'm really proud of the final product, and I hope people who've gotten a chance to read it believe that it was fair and honest and definitive. And I think it was.
I know you said that too, that, he tried tried hard for the book not to get done, and he encouraged people not to cooperate with you and be interviewed for the book. Were there any people from the Patriot organization that were on the record?
I did talk to some players who agreed to be quoted on the current roster at the time I was doing the book. I talked to many players from past Belichick teams, both in New England and Cleveland, who were on the record, and executives and coaches. But as far as when I was reporting and doing research on that book, active members of the Patriot organization, whether it's players, coaches, executives, there was a handful of people in that realm who did agree to on-the-record interviews. Not many. Without getting too specific, I can say I talked to many, many people in the organization who provided some clarity on many issues and facts and other things in the book. So, but Bill Belichick did not talk to me in any way. I did send him, towards the end of the process, I sent him an email after I tried and failed to get in front of him. I said, listen, I've interviewed more than 300 people so far. I have a few more to go. And I just want to say that, and come to you directly and say that if you're willing to sit down with me on no notice, I will fly anywhere in the world on no notice and meet you. Whatever is convenient for you, just even if it was for background, off the record, there's some things that maybe you can clarify. There will be some negative things in the book, obviously. Would you like to hear them before they're published? And maybe, even if you don't want to be quoted, you can give me some context that changes some things. And I just wanted him to know directly from me, not going through his publicist or the media relations people with Patriots, that thing to even if it was for 45 minutes, I'll fly anywhere in the world and meet you. And so I didn't think he'd respond, but he did. It was, I believe, a Saturday morning. I get up at 6 a.m. and there's an email from Bill. And it was short. And I wouldn't say sweet, but it was cordial. It was, Ian, I appreciate the offer and opportunity, but I think I'm going to take a pass. I have a really busy spring coming up. And he said, thanks for asking anyway, BB. And so I said, I appreciate the response. In the unlikely event you change your mind, I have until whatever date it was before I was actually going to hand in the manuscript. And even after that, in the unlikely event you change your mind, I am still willing to do what I said. So that never happened. And again, it's his prerogative. And hopefully he got a chance to read the book. And I'm sure there are things in there he didn't like, maybe didn't agree with, but that he at least thought it was fair.
Do you think Bill reads a lot of his press?
He's human. I think they all do to some extent, despite the fact that many athletes and coaches say they don't. I just don't understand as a human being how you can stay away from all of it, not have some curiosity about what people in a public forum are saying about you. And so, or at the very least, if he's not doing a ton of reading, and I think he does, and he's got people who will feed him clips, printouts from the internet, and so he needs to know what people are saying, what's going on, what the conversation is around his team, because it could affect the way he coaches going forward in succeeding weeks. So I think he does care, actually, how the media covers his team. And I think he's shown that over time. And I actually think that, listen, when he's at the podium, he is that one-dimensional character. And there's a reason behind that. His whole goal is to get through a press conference without giving other coaches, opposing coaches, any tidbits or information. I know for a fact, and I know there are certain head coaches he believes talk too much during the week in the media, in their press availabilities, And Belichick is picking things out of those answers that he believes helps him in his game plan for that Sunday, Monday night, Thursday night, whatever it might be. And I know for a fact there are a couple of head coaches that he's identified who talk too much, and he uses that against him. So he absolutely doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to help an opposing coach. That's part of the reason he is the way he is at the podium in those news conferences, now in his Zoom news conferences. But I think away from the facility and stadium, and I think I show this in the book, that's not who he is as a human being. There are more dimensions to that character. He just chooses not to show that at the office.
You know, I always had, and maybe you can shed some light on this. I always had a bit of a feeling that persona, and I agree with what you're saying as well, but part of it was him trying to separate himself from Bill Parcells, because they couldn't be more different, in front of a microphone, I don't think.
Well, I also think he doesn't have the natural charisma that Parcells has. And I have this in the book. After he failed in Cleveland, early on anyway, in his stay there, I think he admitted that, maybe I was trying to be too much like Bill Parcells. I'm not going to do that again. And as we've seen, coaches from the Belichick coaching tree have failed in part because they tried to be Belichick. Mangini, McDaniels in Denver, Mangini in New York and in Cleveland. And I think that it's a big mistake when you try to be someone that you're not. And so I'm actually now working on a biography of Mike Krzyzewski. And he was smart enough to realize, now he learned a lot from Bobby Knight, both as a player at Army, as a grad assistant at Indiana, and just in observing him from a distance. But he was smart enough to take the good parts of Knight and leave most of the bad parts behind and be yourself. Might have taken him a while to get to that point. And so I think a guy like Brian Flores, who I really liked before he got hired in Miami, I think he's a guy smart enough to realize I need to be myself. I grew up in Mike Tyson's neighborhood in Brooklyn and Brownsville, and I'm going to be who I am and the way I was raised. And I'll add some Belichick elements to my approach, but bits and pieces here and there. He learned from the greatest ever, so you'd be a fool not to bring some of that program with you, but it's got to be only parts. It can't be the whole thing, or else players are going to see through that, and you're going to get fired.
Yeah, he's doing a good job, too, I think. He's got that team headed in the right direction. It's funny you talked about the coaching tree. You're anticipating places I want to go. It's very interesting, which might be scary for you if you're reading my mind, by the way. But the coaching tree hasn't been that successful. The only one I can think of, and Flores still has to prove himself. The only one I can think of, and it's really a small branch of the tree, is Nick Saban. I can't really think of anybody else that's been really that successful.
No, look at Matt Patricia. That's not really working out, or at least to this point it hasn't. And Charlie Weiss had, a good season at Notre Dame. He started with Parcells anyway, it was brief. So I don't know which tree you were like. He's really more of a Belichick tree guy than me. McDaniels will get a second shot at some point. Surprising it's taken this long, although he had an opportunity to go to the Colts and then he backed out of that deal. So you're right. There haven't been many success stories coming out of the Belichick family. And so I talked to a number of executives around the league about that. And I remember one said, the reason why these guys are failing is because, there's two reasons. One, they're not Bill. And two, they're not bringing Tom Brady with them.
Right.
So look at Belichick's record. I'm not knocking Belichick for this without Brady, because all great head coaches, whether it's John Wooden with Lou Alcindor / Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, Joe Torre with Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, Red Auerbach with Bill Walton. It's just all great coaches. Phil Jackson with Michael Jordan and Pippen, Shaq, and Kobe. If you don't have great talent, you're not going to go down as a great coach. It's not happening. So I'm not knocking Belichick. He's the one who drafted Tom Brady. Nobody else did. So he deserves credit for that. But without Brady, his record is what it is. And so that's a big part of it, that at the centerpiece of his program, he had a player that was willing, despite the fact that he developed into a franchise player and a franchise quarterback, he was willing to be treated and coached like he was the last man on the roster. And that set an example for the rest of the New England Patriots in meetings when Belichick aired out Brady in front of everybody on the practice field. Not that the one thing I really like about Belichick, not the only thing about his coaching styles, he's not a berater. He's not a screamer in practice. Parcells is. I don't really like screamers and beraters.
Right.
He is sarcastic and biting with his humor in the film room, and he'll call you out, but he's not really a screamer. But he would call out Brady in front of the entire film room or meeting room or practice, and Brady accepted that coaching. Now, after 20 years of that, where every mini camp in May or June, every practice is treated like Game 7 of the World Series, I had a friend of Brady tell me he was Belichick out. And I think what human being wouldn't be? They both really needed a change of pace and just to breathe some fresh air with somebody else in their life. It was the greatest marriage in NFL history.
Yeah.
After 20 years, it was time. They wanted something different. And so it played out the way it did with Brady leaving. But if Tom Brady doesn't walk into his life, it doesn't happen. But so he needed a special player, one, and two, that special player had to be willing to be coached the way Belichick wanted to coach him, and Tom Brady was, and he deserves credit for absorbing that for 2 decades.
Yeah, I think the 20 years we talked about, I mean, there might have been a few special years in there with one or the other, but I don't think that you have the entire 20-year run without the two together myself.
If Belichick found another quarterback who was better than Drew Bledsoe, better than Bernie Kosar in Cleveland, Vinny Testaverde did some winning for him in Cleveland the year, Belichick's good year there, the one good year he had where he went 11-5 and he beat Parcells in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Testaverde had played well for him. So somebody at that level or maybe a little higher. Let's give Belichick and Eli Manning. He's going to win. Well, Eli won 2 with a good coach, a very good coach, borderline Hall of Fame coach. Belichick probably wins 3 with him. You give him Chad Pennington stays healthy. I think Belichick can find a way to win 2 titles with Chad Pennington, a quarterback of that level, on that level. So, but he got a little lucky, but luck is the residue of design, and it was his design to draft Tom Brady in the first place, and so it paid off in a staggering way.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and the fatigue factor becomes huge. I mean, I've heard reports that things really started to hit, and you could probably confirm this because I would think you were researching your book about this time. There was a whole Garoppolo situation, obviously, but I heard also a big thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is that Brady and Gronk both had a big problem with the benching of Malcolm Butler in the Super Bowl against the Eagles, and that was really one of the linchpins to the thing starting to fall apart.
No question, and Bill never really adequately explained what went on there. There are many theories that have been floated, and he was trying to do something there, maybe get bigger in the backfield, and he was very concerned about those big running backs the Eagles had, and maybe try to make Nick Foles beat you in the air or beat us in the air, and he did. He was capable of doing that. So I didn't really have a major problem with him trying something different there in the first half. But at halftime, it was clear Nick Foles was prepared to beat the Patriots. And so to not come back to Butler in the second half, to me, that was the unforgivable non-coaching move in that Super Bowl. But players were very upset about that.
Yeah.
And the one thing about Keith, about Belichick, when you're playing for him and talking to so many players who did play for him over the years in Cleveland and New England, is, and particularly in New England, of course, he gives you the best chance to win. That's going to help you win championships and make more money. So that's good, and you accept that. You accept Belichick when he's doing that. But when he doesn't give you the best chance to win, which he did in that Super Bowl against Philadelphia, then you act out. And you saw on social media after that Super Bowl, guys were acting out. And Brady acted out. Mm-hmm. And I know for a fact that into March, he was thinking of walking away from the Patriots. It wasn't simply because of the Butler benching. There were other things going on with Brady, Alex Guerrero, and just the way he felt he was being treated after everything he had done for Belichick and the franchise. And ultimately, he decided to stay, but he boycotted some of those workouts. He was the only starting quarterback to not show up at OTAs, and he was sending a very direct message there. But their relationship got repaired. They won again, and everyone lived happily ever after until Tom Brady decided to walk away. And he felt he was clearly being pushed in that direction anyway. You can argue it was Belichick who really made the decision for him, but Brady's the one who went to Robert Kraft and said, I'm going to leave. And I think he was maybe trying to beat Bill to the punch, and so he did.
I kept expecting Kraft to step in, to be honest with you. I mean, knowing him and Brady's relationship, at least from what I had seen and heard, I kept expecting him to step in and say, you can't do this, and to Belichick. But what about that relationship and his input in this whole process?
Well, that trinity is very interesting. It was always Brady and Kraft. They lived right next to each other. They were practically neighbors. And so that was where the love was in the organization. It was between Tom and Robert. And their text messages, there would be expressions of love. And that was not the case with Bill Belichick. And people close to Brady told me that Tom Brady has never gone to dinner with Bill Belichick over 20 years. Now, that's okay. They didn't have to go to dinner, but it's a little odd that it never happened even once. But their relationship, so Kraft and Brady was a relationship that had a lot of affection in it and love and was transformational, whereas the relationship between Brady and Belichick was transactional. It was, we're winning championships for each other. We're making each other the greatest ever in our sports. Let's keep this thing going. It's working. And there doesn't need to be love in their partnership. Now, after they won the Super Bowl, at times on the field, maybe you saw some of that love come out. But other than that, it was, hey, we're here to win. We win together. We're better together than apart. And that's what our relationship is about. We don't have to go to dinner. We don't have to be buddies. We're not going to be buddies. But it did work. And Robert Kraft probably does not get enough credit for keeping it together, keeping Bill in house. There are a lot of owners in the NFL who could not deal with Belichick on a day-to-day basis the way Kraft has over the years. And he probably doesn't get enough credit for that.
Yeah, he's been a great owner. When he came in, I was like, he's had some interesting moments through the years, like at the end of AFC championship games where he may have been celebrating a little before the game got over. My buddy and I always joke about it because the very first time they went to the Super Bowl and they lost to the Packers, oh my God, that his interview after that game, you could hardly understand him. I'd been out all day, and you could understand me more than you could understand Robert Kraft that day. But he's been a stalwart, obviously, and he saved the franchise from leaving the area to begin with. And you can't. I agree with you. You can't say enough about Robert Kraft.
Listen, he has his flaws, and
well,
we've seen that recently, and the case he got involved with in Palm Beach.
Yeah,
it was embarrassing to the league. I wrote about it, and I think that there should have been, despite the fact that he was never convicted of any sort of crime in that case. I think that there was enough there for some sort of reprimand from the league. I don't know if that's forthcoming, maybe not. But I don't know how Jerry Jones got into the Hall of Fame ahead of him. And
shocking.
Jerry Jones hasn't done any real winning in forever. Now, obviously, he had the Aikman championships with Jimmy Johnson and one with Switzer. See, there's a good point of contrast in terms of Belichick and Kraft surviving and thriving for more than 20 years. And Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson could have been that. And they broke up. They got divorced very quickly. And had they stayed together, the fortunes of the Dallas Cowboys, the team I grew up worshiping, would be perhaps would have been entirely different. And so that's where, when you're looking at Kraft Belichick, you say, well, Jones and Johnson could have been that, but egos got in the way and they got divorced. And Kraft and Belichick never did.
You know, the Patriots, this whole dynasty has been very good for the NFL. I mean, people love to have somebody to hate, right? And so you either love the Patriots or you hate them. you always see the maps, right, with all the entire country except for this little sliver up here is all Patriot haters. I'll tell you a funny story before we move on here quick. I was on a cruise when they beat they came back and beat Atlanta in the Super Bowl. Super Bowl, what was it, 50? I can't do the Roman numerals anymore. 51 maybe.
Anyway. Yeah, what was it, 52, whatever it was. Yeah,
maybe it was 52.
I was there. It was a memorable one, but
you never saw. I mean, there was about 5 Patriot fans on the ship, and I got up at 5:30 in the morning. We got our places where we were going to watch the game, so I was out there on that deck from 5:30 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. And they were loud, and they were so happy. Everybody on that ship during that entire game until what we all know happened. And I swear to God, there was only 5 of us left on the deck by the time the game was over. So, but I think
you could feel that if you were in the building, and I was, you could feel that coming. And as soon as the momentum changed in that game, and of course Shanahan, some of his play calling really helped the Patriots quite a bit. But only Belichick and Tom Brady and that team and that program would have been able to pull that out, right, from 28-3 to winning maybe the most memorable title, other than I would still say that the greatest win in franchise history is that first Super Bowl over
Rams,
what appeared to be an unbeatable Rams team, particularly that offense. So that started everything. You probably put the victory to come back over the Falcons at number 2. It's hard to beat that first one over the Rams, but I was in the building, and that was something else.
It had to be amazing. It had to be amazing to be there. I somehow kept my faith. I was, people were putting life preservers on me like I was going to be jumping overboard, but I managed to stay the course and see the victory. So also
the value of James White, the ultimate Patriot, in a way, the guy who, even coming out of high school, he wasn't even the most heralded guy in his high school backfield. He goes to Wisconsin. There are other running backs ahead of him who are big-time players. He ends up he's not a first-round pick or anything, but as soon as he got picked by the Patriots, his coaches in Florida in high school and at Wisconsin, they're like, wow, that's a perfect match, Belichick and James White. He is the ultimate Belichick Patriot way player. He grew up the son of a police officer. Unfortunately, he died recently in a car crash. I talked to him at length. His father he raised his son basically to be a patriot. Their household was the Patriot way, a law enforcement household. And so it really was the perfect match. But without James White, they're certainly not winning that game.
Oh, without a doubt. So going forward, well, actually, let me stay backwards a little bit. So we know what Parcells' legacy is, right? You think he's the greatest coach of all time, just ahead of Lombardi. I've got him there as well, of course.
Belichick, not Parcells, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jeez, good grief. That's the worst.
Big Bill and Little Bill.
Gosh, Belichick's never coming on my show. His legacy, how much is it tarnished by Spygate? I mean, even Deflategate, which it wasn't Bill, it was Tom. But, we had the whole press conference with oh, my God, it was the worst 2 hours of TV I've ever seen. But is his legacy going to be tarnished in the long term by all of this stuff that's followed him around?
A little bit, sure, or a lot. It depends on where you live and how you look at it. I think there's certainly those two cases are triple bogeys on his scorecard. There's no doubt about it. I think it's interesting. How much did Spygate really help them? That's one question I would have loved to have been able to ask Belichick. The risk reward there was out of whack. I don't think they gained a ton. It was an advantage. I didn't think it was a very significant advantage based relative to the risk involved, because if you got caught, and Mangini, you remember, of course, they got caught in that Jets game in 2007, that opener. Mangini had sent word to Belichick, don't do this in my house, because Eric was there. He knew the program. He knew the cheating was going on. He was part of it, and he benefited from it. And I don't think he cared if he continued to do it against other opponents, but just don't do it against my New York Jets in my building. And Belichick did it anyway. And there's a great story in my book. One of my favorite stories in the book is finding a couple of state troopers and police officers who ended up sort of negotiating in the bowels of Giant Stadium in possession of the tape. The camera and the tape were seized. And they had Patriot security on one side of the room and Jet security on the other. And these guys didn't know what they had in their hands. They had the Spygate tapes in their hands. They weren't sure what it was. They were trying to figure out what exactly happened and why the Patriots were doing what they did. The Patriot security chief was arguing to get the tape and the camera back, saying, "You're stealing our property." The Jets security guy or guys are arguing that they're cheating. This has to go to the league. There needs to be an investigation. So had those state troopers and police officers, if they had given that tape back to Patriot security, Spygate may have never happened. But it did happen, of course. And I would have loved to have asked Belichick why. And most people who've looked at the case, even Patriot haters, say it probably wasn't that big of an in-game advantage. Then why do it? Of course, it was an advantage, or else they wouldn't have done it. But the risk was so great that you would be tarnished forevermore. Why would you go with that? And so I didn't get a chance to ask him that question. I do think that when people ask me, do you think the Patriots won Super Bowl because they cheated? I say no. Did they cheat? Yes. Is that the reason they won? No, but they did it. And if you believe in your heart that that is a significant reason that they pieced together a dynasty, you have a right to believe that. I'm not going to try to even talk you out of that. But based on my reporting, research, my observation of their program, practice, and the way they attack every day, attention to detail, situational football that they practice in ways that no other franchise really does, and having an all-time, the greatest football player probably of all time, sort of fall into their laps. Belichick buying enough time for himself in that second job to hang on long enough to show his genius. Those are the reasons why they won 6 Super Bowls. But if you want to believe otherwise, again, I'm not going to try to dissuade you from having that viewpoint.
Yeah, as a Patriot fan, I've always been a tad angry because I felt they did things they didn't need to do to win, and it didn't need to be this way. So before we wrap up on the book, I have to touch on one passage that I found really interesting. It's at the very beginning of the book, I think, about Belichick's dad and an experience he had in the Navy.
Yeah, so Steve Belichick, who ended up being a lifer coach, most of his time spent at the Naval Academy as an assistant coach, was never a great head coach, had one head coaching opportunity at a small school, Hiram in Ohio, and didn't have a great record, and basically was a lifer assistant coach. But during World War II, before he started his coaching career, he's in the Navy, and he's stationed on Okinawa, which would have been a staging area or one of the staging areas for an invasion of Japan that thankfully did not happen. It would have cost us a lot of American lives. And so he's in the officers club, and one day an African-American officer, one of the first in the U.S. Navy, named Samuel Barnes, who later became an executive with the NCAA, he walks in. They sort of knew each other a little bit, but as he walks in, every white officer in the club walks out in protest, basically, that this black man is just coming to our club, except for Steve Belichick. He stays, asks Samuel Barnes to sit down. They have lunch. They become friends. For a period of time, they were roommates. And so Samuel Barnes passed on that story down through generations in his family, and the Belichick name in the Barnes family is gold because Steve Belichick he didn't do anything special. He just showed common human decency to a fellow man and officer who certainly deserved it. But I think in a way that people sometimes ask how Belichick relates to the modern athlete, more specifically the modern African-American athlete. I think he grew up in a household that was ahead of its time in America. And I think the impact of his father and what they believed, his mother as well as a teacher and a good-hearted woman, I think did ultimately help Belichick in terms of dealing with his players.
Yeah, it's a great story. So getting past the book a little bit, but still sticking with Belichick and Brady for one more second. I know you've talked, and I don't know if it's recently or a while back, but Brady used to always talk about playing until he's 45. I believe I've heard you talk about the fact you think he'll play until he's 48. Who's going to last longer, Belichick or Brady?
I think Belichick, because it's easier to coach than it is to play.
Yeah.
I think Belichick is going to go into his 70s. Brady, I had a conversation with him, I think it was in 2015, it might have been 16, where in the spring, and I asked him how long, and if your wife is really on board. And I think there was a little bit of a misnomer, Keith, in that his wife wanted to drag him off the field and get him home. His wife is one of the few people on the planet who understands what it means and what it feels like to be the best in the world at something.
Right.
She was the highest paid supermodel in the world for a lot. Her dynasty was better than Brady's. She had a streak of 13 years, let's say, give or take, where she was number one. So, and you only have a certain period of time to be the greatest in the world at something. So I think as long as Brady now, is he the greatest in the world right now? No. Patrick Mahomes is. But he's still playing at a high level, high enough to win a Super Bowl in Tampa. When he left, I thought perhaps it was a mistake because I thought the AFC East gave him the clearest path back to the Super Bowl. He had dominated the AFC East his entire career. And though Buffalo has played good football and they're maybe coming on as a program, I felt that the Saints, now I didn't really anticipate that Drew Brees was going to drop off to the extent that he appears to have dropped off.
Yeah, it looks like it.
The Saints are a program that Brady has never faced in the AFC East, and that was going to be a problem. Well, we'll see, right? The jury's still out on that. But I think I asked Tom Brady, if you're playing at a high level at age 45, could you go to 46, 47, even 48? And he said yes. Yeah, if I'm still playing high-level football, I don't see why I would stop. So he seems to be, although he gets more angry on the sideline so far with the Bucks quicker than he ever did in New England. It seems to me, anyway, barking at people quicker. I don't know why that is, but in any event,
as we get older, I think.
Maybe, and Bruce Arians runs a looser ship, that's for sure. So maybe he feels like he has more freedom to be his own, to act almost as a de facto coach or assistant head coach. But anyway, I think I can certainly see him at 46 and 47. 48 might be pushing it, but it's possible. And he did tell me, for the record, that if he feels good at 45, because that's the number that's been out there that he has talked about, he'll go past 45. And I could definitely see that happening.
You find that ironic at all, or was it just overplayed? And I find it funny that it went away really quickly. You know, we talked about the fatigue and Belichick and, just pounding on you day after day in practice and in film. But he never called Brady or really any of his players out in public to the press. But in Brady's first game, Arians called him out 3 or 4 times that first week. And I found it a little ironic, and then I found it a little strange that it stopped. I mean, after the faux pas he had 2 weeks ago where he forgot what down it was and whatnot, Arians just let it slide like, oh, he knew. Well, he didn't know.
Right.
You think there's anything to it? You think anybody said, you really can't call Tom out like that?
It's possible. It's possible. I think that was an awakening for Brady. I'm sure he didn't expect that Arians basically put the whole thing on him after that opening loss to the Saints. And so that was interesting. You're right. Belichick, he did take a shot at Brady here and there. And again, it was mostly in private to in front of his teammates, which is a different thing than doing it publicly the way Bruce Arians did after Phase 1 with Tom Brady, this all-time great and iconic player. But remember when Brady tore up his thumb in practice before the AFC Championship game against Jacksonville, and it looked like he wasn't going to play, and then he did play, they win. And afterward, when he came up in the press conference, his thumb was mangled. I mean, the vast majority of quarterbacks in the history of the sport would not have played that Sunday, but Tom Brady got out there and found a way to play and play effectively.
Yeah. And
when asked about it in the press conference, I was in that press conference, Belichick said, well, we're not exactly talking about open heart surgery here.
Oh, I do remember that.
Downplayed it. And then he took a shot at Brady, which was interesting and perhaps more significant. The night that Garoppolo was drafted, and Belichick was asked about, well, what does this mean for Tom Brady? And he started talking about his age and his contract status. And I think he said something to the effect that we all know where Tom is in his career. And I couldn't believe that he said that publicly. It's probably the most candid thing, I think, that, not counting the Deflategate press conference, which was bizarre. But in terms of a football matter, the most candid quote and press conference I've ever seen Belichick give after Garoppolo was drafted. So the plan was in place. Brady was going to be replaced. He knew it. And one of the greatest achievements of Tom Brady's career outside of the 6 rings is the fact that he beat the Belichick system. He outplayed the Belichick software. Nobody has ever done that. All those made men in Foxborough going back to 2001 all got pushed out a year early rather than a year late.
At least, right?
Right, at least. Brady was supposed to be out of there, and Garoppolo was supposed to be the quarterback now coming in this weekend to play against his former coach. And yet Brady just sort of drew a line in the sand. I'm not letting this guy take my job. And he got his successor traded. So now here we have Aaron Rodgers. His successor apparently has been drafted. And he was wounded by that. You saw his quotes about how that did bother him. And, well, do what Brady did. Fight him off and force Green Bay to trade your successor. And another reason why Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback and maybe football player ever is that it's interesting that Garoppolo got sent to San Francisco because that's the place where I think Brady really wanted to play.
Right.
That was his hometown team, the team he grew up idolizing. It would have gotten him out of the AFC. So he would have gotten away from Belichick. Belichick would have been more comfortable with Brady out of the AFC. And Brady could have gone home to play his final years. And that, of course, didn't happen. But it is kind of ironic that Garoppolo, of all people, ended up in that job.
Yeah. Well, I know you're busy. I promised to get you out of here about this time. Let me ask you one quick thing. I mean, you see Cam Newton having a future long-term in New England with Belichick. Should he stay healthy? Can they win with Cam?
I have a few more minutes, by the way. Thanks, Keith.
Okay.
That's a good question. I think it comes down to health, and obviously this COVID thing knocked him for a loop, and clearly the rust was there.
That was awful.
You can't lose. Now, Denver's given the Patriots problems over the years. They had better teams than they have right now, and you can't lose that game, particularly at home, even if you have no fans in the building. So that's a setback, that loss. And they had their excuses and reasons. They had like one practice because of the COVID situation.
One practice in 2 weeks, yeah. Yeah,
so it's hard to win under those circumstances, no question about it. But Belichick's teams have always found ways to overcome adversity, and they did in this time. So now this game against the 49ers is critical to get back to 500 before you go to Buffalo. And so I think that it's possible he has a future with Belichick. He certainly has the talent to have. He was playing good football. It's helped with him. I'm not talking about the coronavirus, but if Cam Newton can stay healthy the rest of the season, I think he'll play at a high enough level to come back next year. Do I see him there in 5 to 7 years? Probably not. But I think that now it's a question of him physically just staying healthy. And if he can stay healthy, I think they'll grab that last wild card. Maybe Buffalo wins the AFC East. But I think the Patriots, now with the expanded playoffs, can still get in there. They have a tough schedule. They've had a tough schedule. I thought it's a shame because if Cam Newton were healthy, I think Kansas City was beatable that night, even though the game was in Kansas City. I don't think the Chiefs played a great game. And it just was not, with Brian Hoyer, a winnable game. And it was unfortunate that it played out the way it did. But I think that it's a long way of saying I don't know, but I think if Newton is healthy the rest of the season, I think he'll play effectively enough to come back at least next season.
Yeah, well, the downside, that's not a downside. If he plays well and stays healthy, he could potentially command a longer-term contract for more money than the Patriots are willing to pay him. That'd be my worry.
Yeah, that's possible, sure. But if he finds a comfort, he seems to enjoy being in New England, and you're with the greatest coach of all time. And so, to me, that's worth giving up a little money, maybe not a lot. And so he may decide, listen, this season was a crazy season. We had some opt-outs that hurt us, particularly on the defensive side of the football. And those players, some of them will be back. And I'll be better with Belichick and Josh McDaniels with a year under my belt in this system. So I hope that partnership works out. I'd like to see Newton stay in New England and make that work. And I think there's still a pretty good chance that will happen.
Well, I appreciate you. You've obviously got some great inside knowledge on the subject. Ian, and I appreciate you being with me. I want to get into more subjects, but I hope I can get you back on sometime because I'd love to talk about the Jeter book. I haven't read the Arnie and Jack book, and I'm actually going to get that to read immediately. But you've written about some iconic sports figures, obviously, and now you're writing a book about Mike Krzyzewski. How far along are you there?
I still have a ways to go. I have to get it done by May. So it's when you're doing a book, it sort of hovers over you every second of every day. And
yeah.
So the same thing's happening. I'm living through it right now, but it's very rewarding at the end of the process when you have that book in your hands. So I'll get there. I'll find a way to get over the goal line, but there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears along the way.
Well, I'd love to get you on and chat with you about that book as well. Is there a figure out there that you can kind of point a finger at and say that's my ultimate goal of writing a book about this person or this topic?
Yeah, I don't have one right now. I'm so focused on right now. To me, it's Coach K. I haven't done it. I haven't finished it. And I guess there was a little bit of a natural progression from Belichick to Coach K. They're arguably the two best to ever do it in their sports. And they have a little bit of a friendship. And so, but I think after this one, I'd like to try something different. So it won't be a coach again. I don't want to do three coaches in a row, three iconic coaches in a row. So I think I'll be looking for a different challenge, maybe even outside of sports. I've thought of doing maybe an iconic figure who's not an athlete or a coach. And again, this will be my fifth sports book. So that's a challenge I think I'd like to take on at some point.
Well, I'm sure we'll all look forward to it. I thank Ian O'Connor for being my guest today. He's the author of Belichick, The Making of the Greatest Coach of All Time. I didn't mess that up, did I?
Nope.
Also, the journey of Jeter. Excuse me, I'm having trouble speaking this late at night. Arnie and Jack, obviously the Palmer-Nicholas Gulf's greatest rivalry. I'd love to get you on and talk about some of those topics as well sometime. And this has been a really fun time for me, and I appreciate you being with me today.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thanks, Keith. Best of luck with your show, and look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thank you again, and we'll be reading your articles as we go forward.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. My interview with Ian O'Connor. We did this last night.
This is time that matters. A window of time to help protect.
I don't know where I'm getting that feedback from, but hope you guys don't hear it. I'm sure you guys are hearing that. I don't know where that's coming from. Well, some technical glitches this morning for the first time. Ian was actually, as you notice, a great interview. I think I see the problem. I was still playing YouTube. You were going to get some news there. So anyway, thanks to Ian O'Connor. Awesome interview. I hope that we'll have Ian back on. Look for the books. This book on Belichick is the ultimate Bill Belichick, whether you're a Patriot fan or not. If you want to get a feel for the man and how this was built and the things that turned Belichick into the great coach he is today, and even some of the things that we don't like, even as Patriots fans, about Bill Belichick, you're going to learn how those things came about and how he developed into the person that he is today, and the persona that he puts out there. Where there's a business Bill and there's a fun human Bill. John Bon Jovi. You heard Ian talk about John Bon Jovi being his friend for 30 plus years, and somebody who's in their right mind is going to think, oh my gosh, Bill Belichick and John Bon Jovi, of course they're friends. There's a difference. There's a different Bill. There's multiple Bills. But it was a great interview. I want to thank Ian for coming on. I know that he's very busy, as we've talked about over the past several weeks and maybe months trying to get Ian on. He's really focused, laser focused on getting this book done. So his time is very precious. So again, thanks to Ian O'Connor. I want to remind you guys that I will be on. I want to thank all of you who are here. Please like the page, follow the page, share the videos. We're growing. I'm going to continue to grow. We'll be here Sunday, 9 a.m. for our weekend recap. We'll look at the whole college football schedule, the Big Ten jumping into the action this week. So things are going to start hopping on the college football scene. We'll take a look at what's going on in the World Series right now. It's even up. These guys needed a day off yesterday. You can see that they're kind of sleepwalking through these games a little bit, which is, not making for great TV, unlike TGI Sports Talk, which nothing ever goes wrong here. But join us Sunday. We'll also do our NFL recap, kind of looking at the big stories of the week and then doing our NFL picks, which Keith has been on a bit of a downslide. So I hope you'll join us then. Next week, Billy Martin Jr. right here at 8 a.m. on TGI Sports Talk, live from East Greenbush, New York on the NLB Network. Hope to talk to you soon, guys. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.